The Layah Heilpern Show. Sponsored by Step Finance, your go-to DeFi portfolio manager on Solana. Luno, if you're just getting into Bitcoin, it's the perfect place to start.
Things really are just starting to heat up.
Hey guys, and welcome back to the Layah Heilpern Show. As always, it is powered by Icon Plus Capital and it is sponsored by BlockFi. So today I am in Miami. I'm very excited. We're here for the Bitcoin conference and I thought I would get in some interviews from some very high profile people in the space. So joining me today is a man that I don't think needs much introduction, but it is Bitcoiner Robert Breedlove.
I'm honored that I fit your category of high profile people. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure. And you're obviously the host of the What is Money show.
Yes, we've been doing it for almost a year and a half now, and it's been quite successful. So I'm very, very humbled by it and consider myself very grateful and lucky to be able to do what I love every day.
I totally agree with you. I totally understand that. But I'm curious about your background before Bitcoin. I know that you're a hedge fund guy. So talk to me about your background.
Yeah, so I have a master's degree in accounting and finance. So straight out of school, I was actually in public accounting for a number of years, basically focusing on tax strategy for high net worth people and investment partnerships and businesses. So I kind of saw the belly of the beast, so to speak, in terms of how people navigate tax law and exploit loopholes and preserve capital and all of that. But quickly discovered that was not the business for me. So it's funny now that I speak out against statism and taxation, but I actually have a master's degree in taxation, which is a little bit weird. I then got into basically the entrepreneurial path. I was a CFO for a number of tech companies early and mid stage, and then basically fell into the Bitcoin rabbit hole, late 16, early 17. And that's when I got into the hedge fund business. So I originally started a multi-strategy crypto asset fund. So we're trading in and out of a lot of positions, a lot of coins. And then over time, as I was writing my monthly investor updates and just trying to get my head around Bitcoin, I kept falling more and more into the Bitcoin rabbit hole. So becoming much more focused on Bitcoin at the exclusion of everything else. Finally, in 2020, I guess a lot of people had realizations that year. And my realization was that I was spending all my blood, sweat, and tears in this hedge fund business trying to outperform Bitcoin, which is the best performing asset in human history, when I could just pivot to basically an accumulation position like I did with my personal wealth and then free up all my time. So that's basically what I did. And then I had this idea inspired by a lot of things, but partly by Jordan Peterson. You know, he has this successful podcast. He talks about this technological revolution that we're in with YouTube and podcasting, that effectively the cost of bandwidth has gone to zero. So we can talk about anything and distribute it to the world at almost zero cost. So I thought I would kind of zig while everyone else is zagging. A lot of people, if you go on YouTube or podcasts, there's a lot of just surface level discussion occurring. I thought I would capitalize on the low cost of bandwidth and just do deep dives on whatever topics I wanted to. And the main question, I think, in the Bitcoin rabbit hole is, what is money, right? Like, if you need to answer that question for yourself, not that it has one final answer, but it's got a lot, to understand the implications of Bitcoin itself. And serendipitously, at that time, I was going to start the show. Mr. Saylor DM'd me, said he had just bought a lot of Bitcoin and he appreciated my work. So I invited him on to be my first guest. And the Saylor series is now 17 episodes long. And that's been a big success. So that really launched the show. And I spend all my time reading, writing, and talking to the smartest people in the world about big ideas. So very happy about that.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the Saylor podcast. I watched pretty much all of those series. But you're always asking people, what is money? And I think Michael Saylor has this really technical approach with it, almost quite like a physicist almost. But you're quite philosophical when you speak about Bitcoin. Would you regard yourself as a philosophical person? And what sort of philosophy do you live by? And how has that philosophy impacted your life?
Yeah, I've naturally always been predisposed to deeper conversations. Never been much for small talk. I can be an overthinker too. Like when I was younger, before I got into yoga, actually yoga and meditation really helped me figure out how to not be an overthinker, how to balance that out. I just found myself intellectualizing about things all the time, thinking about things all the time. But I never considered myself to be a philosopher per se, but I guess the nature of philosophy is, first of all, it means love of wisdom, right? Philia Sophia. But it really has to do with inquiring into the fundamental nature of things. So if you've ever hung out with like a 2 or 3 year old kid and they're just asking why this, why that, why this, why that, that's literally the child trying to establish their philosophical anchor points to the world so they know how to move through the world. And I guess I just never stopped asking why about things. And I don't know. I don't know how to turn it off or whatever. And now I'm fine with philosopher as a label. People have given me that. The only thing I don't like is when they say self-proclaimed philosopher, because I think that's a bit trite for somebody to do that. And I don't label myself as such. I do label myself, however, as a freedom maximalist. I think that just captures my deepest beliefs for myself and what I want to give others as well. I think there's a weird thing about freedom in that when we maximize it, not only do we maximize our satisfaction in life, but we also create more wealth and more satisfaction of human wants on a global scale. So we know that sort of in America. We have this Western civilization tradition, but in recent years, you know, specifically with the introduction of central banking and fiat over the past century, we've started to regress against that. And I think Bitcoin is just the purest form we've ever had of an implementation of the principles of Western civilization. Like, it is life, liberty, and property incarnate in many ways. So I'm just so happy that Bitcoin exists right now, given how crazy the world is going. And I'm just thrilled to be a part of this mission to educate. But I don't want to say, like, it's not me educating people. I actually consider what I do learning out loud. Like, I'm learning. I'm talking to people I want to talk to about topics I want to talk about that I find interesting, that advance my knowledge. And then I get to share that dialogue with the world, and people engage with that. You know, they can sense when you're, I guess, surfing the edge of your own understanding, and hopefully exchanging ideas with people that produce insights that you could not do broadcasting from a podium, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, these podcast situations, you can get into so much more detail.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you talk about what is money. So with all those conversations that you've had, in your opinion, what is money? Is it a store of value? Is it a means of transacting? Or is it a transfer of energy, like Saylor says?
You would think for a guy that runs a show called the What is Money Show, I'd have some canned response for this when I go on other shows. But I actually have a document with over 50 answers to that question. And I've been actually writing on my Substack. I've been publishing basically a series of answers to that question. Like, money is this, money is that, money is this. I never know which one to pick when someone asks me. But today, the one that comes to mind first is that money is quite simply a title to human time. So many of us probably own stocks or have owned stocks at some point. All that represents is an ownership claim on the capital of that company, ultimately. Like, if you go all the way to the bottom of the stock certificate. And I think you can view money in a similar way, in that instead of being a title to a specific company's capital, it's a title to the global capital stock, right? Money can be used to acquire anything the marketplace can bear. This is any product, any good, service, knowledge, whatever it may be. And all of those things are themselves products of human time. There's nothing that doesn't take human time to produce, right? Like, even people want to talk about land, or even land takes hands to sell, takes time to sell. So in that sense, money is really the most important form of property humans have. And the more we economize our efforts, so the deeper we subdivide labor, this is called like the economic division of labor. Basically, the more intensity of exchange we have, and the longer and more roundabout our production processes are, the more capital we can produce per unit of human time. So money ends up just being a claim on that economic surplus we create through cooperation. And it's frankly just the most important tool humans can wield. So that's a temporal aspect on money. Like, as you mentioned, Saylor has this whole energy aspect on money, which is also equally fascinating and complementary in a lot of ways. And yeah, that's just one example of, I never thought of money that way before talking to Saylor. And there's other, like I talked to, his name escapes me at the moment. He's basically, he's an evolutionary biologist, and he described money as liquid fitness, right? Like in a Darwinian sense. So there's all these unique answers that have come out of these conversations that just keep enriching my viewpoint and giving me new answers to write about on what is money.
And you said that right now you're particularly happy that Bitcoin exists. And you said that Bitcoin really encompasses what Western society is supposed to be, freedom, liberty, and all of that. So I'd like to get into that. Why particularly right now are you happy that Bitcoin exists? What is the problem for you right now that Bitcoin is solving?
Well, the problem in the world is excessive overgrowth of the state or government. You know, when you get into the libertarian rabbit hole, you come to see government as the only business, let's say non-criminal business, that derives its revenue from involuntary exchange. Every other business, it's voluntary, right? You go to buy the car, you're negotiating a price, you reach a point and you execute the transaction, or you don't. Buyer and seller always have a say-so in every trade and every business in the world. That's not the case with government. We've been stuck in this, it's almost like a technological problem, I think, pre-Bitcoin, that we've been stuck with this situation of how do we preserve the integrity of the relationship between people and their stuff, owners and assets. That relationship itself, by the way, is property, right? How do we preserve that relationship in a way? So we have to outsource the physical security, right? Someone has to, you have a deed to your house. So if someone comes in and sleeps on your couch, you can call, you know, the cops or whatever security force to remove that person. How do we preserve that relationship between people and their stuff in a way that the security provider that's securing that relationship does not use their security measures to abuse that relationship? And so that's what the state is. Like, we've outsourced all of our physical security to one monopoly on violence, effectively. And then we just trust them to charge us the right price. We don't negotiate. It's almost unnegotiable.
Yes.
For most people, 99.99% of people. There is a certain echelon of, if you're a billionaire or you're a multinational conglomerate, you can actually negotiate with nation states because you've developed so much negotiating leverage. But for the vast, vast majority of people, it's just not the case. So, and when you have that, it's almost a contradiction in terms in a way, because you basically have the state saying, hey, pay me to preserve this relationship between you and your stuff, whatever amount I tell you, or I'll take your stuff. So that's been like our best solution to the problem of property up until this point. And that is, by the way, the exclusive purpose of government. We get into these weird, like, we think governments are supposed to do these other things that, preserve the greater good or whatever, but that's all nebulous and doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, the fundamental economic purpose of government is property. So we've had this weird thing where we've always needed the monopoly on violence to honor the property rights. Well, along comes Bitcoin. I guess before that, where we are today, it's like that institution, that monopoly on violence, is now preying on the property rights of people heavily. And this is important to know too. Fiat currency inflation, when they're printing money, we could think about that one order deep and we think that's a good thing, but what's actually happening is just a transfer of wealth from the people that can't print money to the people that can print money. That's all it does. Printing money doesn't add any new productive factors to the economy. So it's purely a mechanism for wealth transfer, or, said differently, property violation. Fiat currency inflation is a violation of property rights. So what are we doing in the post-COVID world? We're rampantly violating when I say we, the state is rampantly violating the property rights of citizens worldwide. Every central bank worldwide is printing money to save the economy, to help people out. And people believe it because they don't understand money. So Bitcoin is important because finally citizens have an option to preserve their wealth in a medium or a form of property that lives independent of the monopoly on violence. Basically the miners are providing the security in the case of Bitcoin at a fair price, right? They can't coerce you to use Bitcoin. They can't, all of the transaction fees are done in a free market manner. There's not a coercive element within Bitcoin. So that gives citizens that may be being preyed upon or oppressed by the state in terms of having their property violated an alternative, an opt-out. And so just by giving people that option to exit, I think in the long run, it actually forces government to behave more honestly, to actually treat people like customers rather than subjects. And so that's what I'm trying to educate people about. Like, property is the sole purpose of government. Property is also the basis of civilization. Like Ayn Rand said, if a man cannot control the fruit of his own labor, he has no other rights. All human rights, everything that we think is good, civil liberties, all these things, it's built on property. And so finally we have a property that's independent of the state, cannot be inflated, cannot be manipulated, cannot be corrupted. And that simple opt-out option forces governments to deal with this more honestly.
But we live in a society whereby this is a very libertarian mindset, and it's one that I share. And the idea that we should have a small government, if any at all, is a very niche idea, particularly in 2022. So if property is just the sole purpose, how did we get to a point where the government really is in every aspect of our lives, even to the point where we will protect you, take this medicine because we know that this is better for you? How did we get to a point where the government is in every aspect of our lives?
Central banking and fiat currency, right? A government, effectively, by having a central bank implemented inside of a country, the government effectively has a mechanism of unlimited revenue, and you could also say a mechanism of limited liability. So a government can go and spend and borrow as much as it likes, misallocate as much capital as it wants, run huge deficits, losses, right? And an economic deficit or loss, that means you're spending resources that are not satisfying humans. You're wasting resources. That's what it means. But when a government can just print new money to pay for this paper over this bad decision making, this capital misallocation, and then externalize the cost of all that money printing onto the productive society, they're just confiscating wealth from productive people that are running profitable businesses, creating valuable goods and services in the world, and then channeling it into the government misallocation of capital. So it's a business that can never lose, right? It's heads I win, tails you lose from the state's perspective. They can make bad decisions, screw it all up. Well, just print more money. I'll confiscate wealth from everyone that was successful in the marketplace and then reallocate capital further. So fiat currency has led to the overgrowth of the state. It's led to an overemphasis, I argue, on politics. People have such a deep connection to their personal political identity and their collective political identity. They really think that's the most important thing in the world, right? Are you liberal? Are you conservative? Are you red? Are you blue?
I think these days I find that very important, knowing what somebody is, just in case.
I think it's all premised on the violability of property. Because in this hypothetical world where you can't hurt me and you can't steal my stuff, this would be just a hypothetical world that's not even possible. It's an ideal. But in a world where you can't hurt me, you can't steal my stuff, why would we ever argue about political opinions? Why would we ever try to put ourselves under one roof? If we don't get along, we don't see eye to eye about whatever issue it is, whatever social issue it is, we would just go our separate ways.
So just so I can understand, you're essentially saying because we have a central banking system, those at the top can print more money, which ultimately gives them more power, which introduces that monopoly on property rights and being able to have that authority to confiscate and to threaten with violence. You know, if you don't do as I say, Am I understanding, or am I missing it?
Somewhat like that. So again, if we're looking at money as title to human time, we could also label the central bank as an institution of systemized time theft. So they're printing money, right, doling it out arbitrarily to a politically advantaged or connected few at the expense of everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
So at the heart of the quote unquote free market capitalist economy that we say we have in the United States, we have an anti-capitalist organization that steals from everyone that's productive and successful and allocates the stolen proceeds to those who are unsuccessful. And we end up with things like zombie companies. We end up with just all the political nonsense we see today. Like, these people have just lost their mind. You see it in their character. You see it in their duplicity, right? They're saying one thing, doing another. So although money is like purely a technological, it's kind of a social technology, I think the implications of corrupting money actually have they create a spiritual pathology on the world, that we end up in this world where we think we need to impose our opinions on other people, which is anti-libertarian, anti-freedom, wealth destructive, right? So all this is anti-economic. Everything that we've figured out to construct Western civilization, the concept of fiat, meaning do this because I said so or I will hurt you. That's what fiat means.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing you use with your kids, right? Clean up your room or you're going to get a spanking. That's fiat. That does not work in the sphere of adult relations, in my opinion. I think it's net value destructive, net capital destructive. I think it's corrosive to our character and our behavior. And I think that is where we're at today. We're sick. We're very sick. And without something like Bitcoin, I would be very pessimistic about the world.
I felt that pessimism, but also that optimism during 2021 with the lockdowns. And I felt, at least just on a surface level, I sort of felt, well, they can take away your job. They can take away your rights to your body. They can take away your right of your freedom of movement, but they can't confiscate your money.
Right.
But you tweeted something which I thought was really entertaining. And I actually thought it was a joke when you first tweeted it. It was somebody talking about their pronouns. And trying to tell their child that it's he, him, not she, her. And I believe this was a biological woman. And you said that this is fiat-induced psychosis. Now, a lot of people refer to things like, let's just say, like a blue tick on Twitter as, oh, that's fiat, I don't want that. So that's sort of what I thought you were saying, but you actually mean it. This woke culture, this new wave of so-called progressive liberalism is fiat-induced. So can you go into more detail on how this wave of woke culture is fiat-induced?
Yeah, this is admittedly, I'm kind of like at the edge of my own understanding about a lot of this. But one of the things Peterson highlighted years ago was that he was not going to give in to compelled speech. There were laws being passed in Canada that said you must call this person whatever gender they select for themselves. And through his studies of history, he knew once you started to violate the freedom of speech, you would now be on a slippery slope toward totalitarianism. And so I think there's something about, again, fiat existing in the world, and it's not just currency. People always, especially in Bitcoin, think it's just the money, but legislation by fiat, right?
What do you mean legislation by fiat?
The English common law tradition was originally there. We would observe how people behaved over many long periods of time, how things had been resolved traditionally, and that discovery process would be implemented as law. It wouldn't be one guy sitting down writing a law saying this is law. It was an observational discovery process rather than a process of dictate, which is legislation by fiat. Do this or I'll hurt you. So, and like ancient Romans didn't even have a concept of that. They actually thought all law was basically natural law, and the job of the rulers was to discover this and codify it, not to sit there and write laws and tell people what to do. So again, we're sick. Like, we think this is how we have to do things. We need to coerce people into good behavior. And when you have that perspective in mind, you end up creating this fight where everyone wants to get on the side of the coercive apparatus to try and tell other people what to do according to their worldview. So everyone's trying to impose their opinions on others. And I think that this whole idea of pronouns, right? I'm a flag, I'm a chair, it gets absolutely crazy. And then if you don't remember my pronoun and use my pronoun, then I'm going to coerce you, I'm going to shame you, I'm going to cancel you. Like, this is asinine. That's all anti-free speech, right? If you ask me to call you the pronoun and you're my friend and you're nice about it, maybe we can mutually agree and I'll agree to do that, sure. But to try and codify this, like actually bringing to bear legal compulsion on people that do not speak the pronoun that you wish to be called. I mean, this is like an adult playing imaginary, effectively. Like, I want to be whatever pronoun I've selected, and if you don't call me that thing, I'm going to hurt you. So they're like trying to impose opinion or impose imaginary play in the adult world. So I think this is all contributing to that psychotic behavior. And it sort of feeds back onto itself too, where it's like, if you do give into that coercion, then all of a sudden, like, you know, you've been taken advantage of in a certain way. So you feel like you have to play that game. And it's just very psychologically, spiritually cancerous, in my opinion. And I think we need to be rid of all of it. We just need freedom, like mutual consensual exchange across the board. We need to absolutely put that at the highest echelon of our value hierarchy and just respect and acknowledge that. Even in a purely economic sense, that's the only way you create value. Like a mutual, this is called the inequality of exchange in economics. Two people only trade when you and I would only execute a trade if you think what I have is more valuable to you, and I think the same thing in reverse. I think whatever you have is more valuable to me than what I'm giving up. That's the only time we trade. So that when we both leave that trade, we've both produced a psychological profit. We're both better off. I got more value than I gave up. You got more value than you gave up. We increase the aggregate value, or at least the perception of value in the world. Only if it's mutual on both sides. If it's not mutual, then it's destructive, right? Someone's leaving that exchange hurt, basically. And so this idea of compulsion, coercion, imposition, I think it just needs to be wiped from human affairs completely.
The thing with that is that it becomes inherently political, because where there's people, there's politics, right? And I think freedom is just a political standpoint. If you take the 4-point spectrum, whether it's authoritarianism, liberalism, whether it's left, right, whatever it is. So a lot of people say that Bitcoin isn't political, and I understand that the technology isn't political, but what you're saying to me, and I entirely agree, is inherently political. It's libertarianism.
What's your definition of politics?
My definition of politics would be, well, it's a hard question. I think where there's people, right? Where there's people, there's politics.
People are obsessed with it. They can't define it.
That's a good one. Where there's people, there's politics, right?
Again, it depends on the definition. Here's two definitions that I've heard that I think make sense. One is something like the marketplace is the sphere of distributed cognition. So this is where people are trading with one another. We can all the information basically in the marketplace is contained in the price. So we're engaging, like our individual cognitive computational system is plugged into the market, which is like the minds of everyone else. So it's a distributed computing system. I've heard politics defined as the ethics of that system.
Right.
So there's a cognitive element, which is the distributed cognition of the market. Well, we also need distributed ethics put right on top of that. That definition of politics I can work with, right? Sure, we need some ethical considerations. We need to hash that out. We need to talk about it. The other definition of politics, which I think is much more apt to modern reality, is this idea of imposing your opinion.
Yes.
Right? We vote nationwide. 51% of the people decide they want this thing. Then the law is written by fiat and imposed on the other 49%. Basically, that's coercion. That, I think, is nonsense. It's like just give people the ability to opt out, exit, say no. Then you are honoring their sovereignty. You're honoring individual decision making. And that leads to human flourishing, in my opinion. Value creation, capital accumulation, satisfaction of human wants. So depending on how we define politics, I would agree with you. Wherever there are people, there are politics, in the sense there are ethics to this system of distributed cognition we have to engage in to be smart, successful, creating wealth, advancing civilization, frankly. But this other idea of politics where I need to shove my opinion down other people's throat because of, I don't know where people get it, honestly. I've never wanted in my life ever to like impose my opinion or control someone like that. I don't know where that comes from.
Your biggest problem then as a freedom maximalist, and I feel maximalist kind of says it all really, doesn't it? Is the imposing, right? So sort of mandating something.
No coercion, no compulsion, no violence.
Okay. So this is interesting. El Salvador makes Bitcoin legal tender. And that's all very exciting. But some issues that I've heard people have, and this is something which is hushed away and we're sort of not allowed to talk about, is
legal
the fact,
tender.
Yeah. So you have to use it. Well, you could use dollars as well, or not. You can use dollars as well.
I don't know.
Okay, but it has to be accepted because it's legal tender. So if you go to McDonald's and you want to buy a Happy Meal, whatever it is, you have to accept it. A private business has to accept it.
I disagree with that.
You don't. You disagree with.
I disagree with
legal
tender
tender
law completely, because it is coercion, it is compulsion. Even though it serves the adoption of Bitcoin, I still don't agree with it.
Why don't you think people talk about that?
I don't know. I didn't know people don't talk about that. I'll talk about it. I don't support it.
That's interesting. You have this mindset as well that Bitcoin fixes this, and I really want to get into that more because it's sort of a cliche that we hear online quite a lot, particularly about war. You have this theory about war, and what is your theory about war? How does Bitcoin prevent war?
Yeah, let me answer. I would like to define freedom maximalism, actually, and then I'll answer that question. So typically maximalism means you're going to maximize a metric at all other costs, right? So if you were what's that dangerous, they always talk about the hypothetical dangerous artificial intelligence, if it was a staple maker, or maybe it's a paperclip maker,
right?
That it would just maximize paperclip production at the cost of everything else in the world. And before you know it, we'd all be drowning in paperclips.
Right.
So maximalism is typically used as a derogatory term. And I believe Bitcoin maximalism was originally a derogatory term from Vitalik. But I want to speak, I think freedom is specifically unique. And I've had it out with actually Balaji on my show about this. He's like, you can't be maximalism. You want to talk about more optimalism. So you want to maximize a certain metric within some limiting principle, right? So you're not drowning in paperclips, so to speak. Freedom maximalism, in my view, though, is I want everyone to maximize their freedom in terms of freedom from coercion, freedom to do things. So this would be actually, as we accumulate more capital, we're basically giving ourselves more options, right? We can do things that we couldn't do without that capital. You said you flew here from Dubai, right? That was not an option 200, 300 years ago, right? Just didn't exist because we didn't innovate that. So I think freedom maximalism is maximize freedom within the limiting principle of the private property of others.
Yeah.
So it is self-optimizing because property itself is an expression of freedom. It's the fruit of your past freedom. So I think the ideal world is everyone maximizing their own freedom within the limiting principle or within the boundaries of the private property, which is the freedom of others. So I think it's a self-optimalizing, to use the Balaji term, ideal. So when I say freedom maximalism, that's what I mean. Like,
just on that point then, why do you regard yourself as a freedom maximalist rather than a Bitcoin maximalist?
Because I think Bitcoin, I clearly support Bitcoin heavily, but this idea, I see it in the Bitcoin community, that they become toxic. They want to attack people for their portfolio construction. They want to moralize people for their anything, communications, assets they hold. I just don't believe in that. I don't want to be a part of that culture. I'm not going to go shame people for what they buy. Buy whatever you want. I'll see you in the marketplace. My money will outcompete yours, or so I believe. Maybe you're right. Maybe you'll outcompete me. I have no idea. And to try and attack people, it just feels very high school. And I think it's also decremental to experimentation. Like, let people experiment. All these shit coins, like, I consider them to be mostly test net for Bitcoin, but that doesn't mean I'm going to like dogmatically attack people and write these long treatises about why Ethereum sucks. And like, more power to you. If you want to do that, that's fine. But I personally want to identify with the deeper principle. You know, Bitcoin's the greatest implementation I think we've ever had of life, liberty, property, which is freedom. But I don't want to dogmatically associate myself with a culture that I just don't identify with.
So in terms of Bitcoin fixing it then, talk to me about war. How does Bitcoin essentially prevent war? Because I believe that's what you say, right?
Yeah, and I want to be clear about this. Oftentimes when you talk about these big topics, people just think in binaries. It's like there's either war or there's no war.
Right.
It's like not necessarily. In my opinion, everything in reality exists on a continuum. So and the premise behind this thinking is, you know, this is the old Charlie Munger quote, show me the incentive, I'll show you the outcome. So we have these institutions called states. They're monopolist on violence. They're charged with preserving the property rights of their citizens, right? Keeping the peace so people can trade and increase wealth. But they tend to bump up against other states, right? And people being the territorial species that we are, and the state being a business. I think this is very important too, that all human organizations are businesses, so they're all growth-oriented. They're all trying to grow, all trying to expand revenue, trying to become more profitable. This includes government. This includes your church. This includes every organization or club you've ever been a part of. Like, it has to have more economic inflows than outflows, otherwise it doesn't exist, right? It's Darwinian in a way. So throughout history, you know, we had the issue where we needed to, and I'm just going to say we needed to. I'm not 100% sure we needed the state so much as it's been imposed upon us, but we'll just say we needed this security outfit to preserve property, to have trade, basically to have economies. Well, when those economic enclaves bump into each other and they're both trying to grow, right? They're both trying to expand their territorial footprint. What happens? Conflict develops, typically over resources, also over land. It gets painted over with a lot of moral bullshit, like, oh, we're capitalists and you're communists and we need to bang our belief systems together. This is a point I deeply disagree with Peterson on. He thinks it's not economic. He thinks we go to war over our belief systems on principle. Completely disagree with that, because war is the most anti-economic thing you can do. If you can't pay for it, then you can't do it, then you're going to lose, basically. So that's been the norm of human history. But when you get into a world, again, where you have this property right independent of the state, Bitcoin being secured by the mining network, you can no longer fund warfare through inflation. This is really important because the atrocities in World War I and World War II of the 20th century, the scale and scope and severity of war was unlike anything we had ever seen because of the central bank. Historically, governments or these states would bump into each other. They go to war. War is the most expensive thing you can do. They could only fund that warfare from their own balance sheet, from their own war chest. So typically, two states go to war. Someone gets in financial straits. They cut a deal. They sign a treaty. There's an armistice, whatever. Well, when you install a central bank, all of a sudden, that balance sheet or war chest that they were confined to, their own monetary reserve, is now expanded to the entire savings of civilization, because they can print money to keep paying for the war effort until they hyperinflate the currency and they confiscate all the wealth from the entire country versus just the state. So again, this led to the overgrowth of the state and therefore the overgrowth of warfare, basically. So by virtue of Bitcoin existing as an option to opt out of that inflationary environment and that inflationary means of funding large-scale warfare, states now have to go back to the original means of funding war, which is explicit taxes, like I'm sending you a bill, or borrowing. This is much more visible and visceral for people. I think the numbers, the U.S. war on terror was something like 80,000 per U.S. household.
Wow.
Right?
That's crazy.
But it was all printed. So if you showed up at someone's household with a bill for $80,000, like, hey, we're blowing up some people on the other side of the world to preserve some oil interest for me and my buddies. I need you to pay this bill.
That's why
People are going to put up a lot more resistance, right? When it's you can see it, versus just printing money and no one understands it and everyone just feels the pain. And then when prices increase, right, the actual tax is being inflicted. What do government bureaucrats say? Oh, it's the greedy capitalists. It's the greedy gas stations, why gas prices are up. It's the greedy food manufacturers, why the cost of food is increasing. They'll say anything but debasing the currency. So they can obfuscate this behind people's ignorance of money. And I think over time, basically Bitcoin just, first of all, through what we're doing, just talking about this decentralized media and educational effort, I think people are waking up to the realities of monetary inflation as they're feeling the pain, right? Like something's not right here. Even if people don't understand cognitively what's going on, people in their procedural body knowing they feel something's really wrong. And so I think states are just going to keep pushing, and this creates a pressure on people to learn more and find alternative means of saving and preserving their wealth, being independent of the state. That creates capital inflows into Bitcoin. And so as Bitcoin continues to grow, these lessons spread. And now when a country wants to go to war, they're going to have to go tax and borrow because capital, if you try to inflate the currency to pay for that war, capital will leave your country. So I see Bitcoin as a disincentive to warfare in the long run. And the final piece of that is Bitcoin custodied properly is really hard to steal. So if you ever had a central bank, say on a Bitcoin standard, when Nazi Germany invaded Poland, they win the war, or the invasion of Poland, they go straight to their central bank, seize all their gold, right? They just had a very expensive war effort to do that. They need to go recoup their costs. Well, rerun that on a Bitcoin standard. It's like you would invade Poland, go straight to their central bank, and there'd be nothing there. Presumably, the central bank would have custodied it in multi-sig or whatever, and there'd be no carrot, right? There's no carrot to warfare at that point. So you're reducing the size of the carrot to warfare, and you're reducing the ability of states to fund warfare via inflation. So this is like a massive tectonic incentive shift away from warfare in the long run.
So as you speak, I have a million questions that are just firing. So just bear with me here, okay? So the first point was that I do agree with Peterson in that I think a lot of war is very philosophical and emotional. The last war between Israel and Gaza, I was literally sitting in a bomb shelter in Israel when Max Kaiser tweeted, Bitcoin fixes this. And so I do take the stance that I think that somehow, religious wars would continue regardless of a Bitcoin standard. However, when you say at the end of the day, war still costs money, and if the average American, has to lay down $80,000, I don't think they're going to be supporting the war in Afghanistan, even if it was philosophical, religious, spiritual, emotional. So that's interesting.
Yeah, you just look at the cost to benefit of violence. This could be local violence, even a guy breaking into your house, right? It's a very risky endeavor. He's going to break into your house, doesn't know who's there, are you armed, what's going to happen. He's only going to engage in that risky enterprise if there's some carrot, right? I'm going to steal the gold or steal the diamonds. But in this vision of a Bitcoinized world where things are stored in multi-sig, it's really hard to steal, really expensive, if not impossible to steal. That carrot goes away. So it's like people just being rational. I'm not saying people are always like, what do you mean? It'll never stop violence. It'll never stop coercion. I'm not saying it stops it. I'm just saying you've massively shifted the incentives away from it.
Right.
That guy that was thinking about breaking into your house because he had a whatever percentage ROI expectation, that expectation has been crushed. And now he's better off probably going to get a job over here and just trading and cooperating with people to produce an ROI for himself. So that's what I'm saying. It's like we're not purely rational economic actors. I agree with that. I know people fight over all types of passionate things. Like I get that. But the systemization of conflict at scale tends to be a rational affair. You're going to do it if there's something to be gained. And Bitcoin makes it such that there is less to be gained from conflict than there is from cooperation.
And you said that the war is paid for via inflation, right? Which therefore requires money to be printed before the war. So this is interesting. If we
Or
look
during, yeah.
So what's interesting right now is we've had the pandemic. I'm trying to think of ways to say that without red flags and stuff like that.
Scamdemic.
Yeah, we've had one of them. Yeah, pandemic. And a lot of money was printed. And now we are supposedly on the verge of World War III with inflation skyrocketing. I don't really think we are, but, with inflation skyrocketing and everything. So do you think is war planned? Like, do they print the money ready to start inflation, ready to pay for war? Is war planned? Yes.
I am so lost, actually, when I try to think behind the eyes of statist and statism. I'm not sure if they are very evil villain level coordinated. You hear all about these certain families that have run the world for 500 years, and it's all planned and it's been orchestrated. Yeah, the Trilateral Commission and the Bilderberg Group, all of that. I don't know, frankly. I deviate between that and have you seen the Netflix movie Don't Look Up?
Oh my God, it was awful. I thought I was going to throw up.
But I equally think government might
be
also
like that.
just be like that. And it's the thinking there is, you become so frivolous and worthless and incompetent when you can just press money and like confiscate wealth. It's like you have there's no check, there's no reconciliation to reality that's sharpening you and hardening you and conditioning you to, you have no skin in the game, frankly. You just don't feel cost or pain. So you just grow. There's an atrophy of the brain that occurs in that sphere. And clearly I'm speaking generally here. I know there's politicians that are maybe fighting for life, liberty, property, and all of that. It's not black or white. But in general, I think when you can just confiscate money at will, you have every incentive. Let's say it this way. It's much easier to spend other people's money than your own.
Correct. That's my problem with socialism.
So you just be frivolous, right? Well, social democracy is the same. Anywhere there's taxation or inflation, it's not their money. It's being confiscated.
Yeah, it's incredible.
It's all theft. So if you derive your revenues via theft...
You think it's entirely theft?
100%. 100%.
So...
Did you get to negotiate your tax bill last year? Did you have the power to say no?
Absolutely not. I remember I paid it and I was very upset about it.
Can you opt out? Can you exit the jurisdiction? Now, some you can. Some you could actually be like, I don't like the rate here. I'm going somewhere else. In the U.S., I think $2 million. You have a $2 million net worth, which is a lot of money, but it's not an incredible amount of money. You can't even opt out. You try to say, I don't want to be in the U.S. anymore. I'm going to leave. You get hit with an exit tax. So you can't say no.
What's the exit tax? How much is it?
I don't know.
Okay.
But they tax part of your net worth when you say, imagine going to a car dealership and you're going to buy a car and you can't come to terms. You're like, I'm going to leave your car dealership now. And they say, actually, you're going to pay me.
That's literally like, it's literally a shitcoin. There are so many projects out there that say if you sell, we'll tax you to sell. And then they make it sound like a good thing because it's just like, nah, it's so we can make people hold.
Fiat's the ultimate shitcoin. Literally, by definition, right? One node database, the Federal Reserve. It's an SQL database maintained on premise, governed by 7 guys, I guess. And they, it's all proof of stake.
It's all proof of stake.
They add as many zeros as they want. And you get no say so. How many dollars are there? Who gets to decide? What are their criteria for deciding? Who's profiting? Who's collecting the seigniorage on the US dollar? None of this is talked about. None of this is voted upon. There's no democratic process. It's the most twisted game in the world. It's the biggest pyramid scheme in human history. So
what would your ideal world look like? Don't just say a Bitcoin standard, because what does that mean, right? Like, do you believe there should be some level of democracy? Should we vote on every issue so we have direct democracy? What does your ideal world look like?
I think, first of all, the free market itself is an actual economic democracy. The idea of democracy that we have today, representative democracy, again, based on the reality that property can be violated, right? That's what's funding the mechanism. And that's also what's being used to impose the decisions that come out of it. If the 51% vote for a thing, they now need to impose on the 49%. That's based on the violability of property. If property weren't violable, they would just split when there's disagreement. So I think the distant long run, and this is very much influenced by the book I talk about a lot, The Sovereign Individual, is that I think software, Andreessen said software is eating the world 10 or 15 years ago, proved to be exceptionally prescient. I think software is also eating the state. So I think we move from a world over time. I don't know how long this is going to take. When I say this, people think I'm crazy. They're like, it'll never happen. We have 200 some odd countries today. I think we have 20,000 after some period of time. I don't know, hundreds of years, thousands of years, I'm not sure. But our socioeconomic realities come to reflect our technological realities. So the nation state was a large governance structure for industrial scale technologies. We now are, most of our attention is flowing through digital technologies, the microprocessor, right? The era of mass customization and communication and all of this. I think our sovereignty structures, our socioeconomic systems will come to reflect that. So much more decentralization, much more small scale governance, much more grassroots everything, right? Much more options, many more options for people. So that's the trajectory. I don't know how long it takes. So
that was going to be my next question. I did an interview with Mark Moss, and he sort of talks about, peak centralization at 2025 and how we're living through one of the most unprecedented eras whereby, we're seeing peak centralization from a financial standpoint, technological, just everything. And it feels like it's reaching its peak. I think COVID was really part of that. Inflation, highest in 40 years. So do you think because, we have the social credit system coming and CBDCs, which we can get into. But do you think we're actually going to get to that sort of authoritarian level? Do you think it's going to get much worse? Or do you think a Bitcoin standard, or not necessarily a Bitcoin standard yet, but do you think Bitcoin or this idea of freedom and decentralization is going to come in and solve the issue of authoritarianism that we're seeing?
I think it's going to play out unevenly around the world. One thing I really liked with my conversation from Balaji is he has this thesis of centralized East, decentralized West.
Okay.
Makes a lot of sense, actually. China's already super centralized. They've got this thing rolled out. They have the people effectively conditioned, where almost like they've taken that Stockholm syndrome of statism to like across multiple generations. So people, it's sad, really. One of the ways I've come to look at the world is that we are programmable. Those of us that understand that will strive to program ourselves, right? We'll choose the things we eat, the people we spend our time with, the books we read, our circumstances, the businesses we run, our lifestyle. Those that don't understand that, though, can be preyed upon by those that do. And that seems to be that fiat / totalitarian impulse, right? So that, I don't know. I think there's going to be pockets of different things happening around the world. But again, the long run is the more you oppress people, the more you drive talent and capital away from that oppression. Smart money and smart people will go to where they are treated best. Mm-hmm. And in the 21st century, via the internet, via Bitcoin, via telecommunications, via encryption, capital and interpersonal mobility is higher than ever. So I just don't think this control mechanism is going to be as effective in the 21st century as it was historically. All that said, there's also the dystopian view, which is what China is doing today. Right? So if you can get that rolled out on top of people without them understanding, if we can roll out CBDCs in this country and they always wrap it in some moral camouflage or some UBI-like incentive. Sign up for your wallet and get your free money, and here's your bug provider, so you don't need steak anymore. You just eat the bugs.
Yeah, let's go into that. So you mentioned that people are programmable, and then you said once you know that, you can then choose the foods you eat. So this is fascinating. I want to go into the food topic actually, because this is something that I've recently stumbled across. I'm obviously British, and in the UK, the food's all right there. A lot of the way the food is processed in the US is actually illegal in the EU.
And you can tell when I've traveled in Europe, it's much better.
Oh, well, I can tell. I was here for 3 months at the end of 2021, and my body blew up. Like I literally put on so much weight. I was still hungry. I wasn't overeating. I put on so much weight. And now I've hired a nutritionist, and now I'm back in the US and I'm fine. But I didn't realize what goes on with the food here. I had no idea.
This is another interesting aspect of the Bitcoin rabbit hole, because you start seeing through the fiat illusion. And again, not just money, not just law. It's also like, I would argue, food and culture. The food thing's interesting. The biggest one that I'm on now is seed oils.
Yep, everyone's on seed oils.
They're in everything with a label. Even the healthy snack crackers or almond butter bar or whatever healthy food you think you're eating, it probably has seed oil in it. So,
and what's wrong with seed oils?
I'm not well versed enough to sit here and lay out a scientific explanation of what's wrong, but I can relate my personal experience. So when I was in my 20s, I used to feel very robust and healthy, I think, as most of us do. As I got to 30, I started to have issues and whatnot. I'm now 36 today. I cut out seed oils probably 8 to 12 months ago, pretty seriously. I mean, I was already experimenting with carnivore a couple of years prior to that, so I'd kind of like accidentally cut out seed oils before I really knew about them. And I guess the gist of what's wrong with them is when you cook or consume these oils that are not naturally occurring, right? They're compressing a lot of oil or taking a lot of seed to make a little bit of oil. Our body doesn't deal with it well. It causes negative things. There's a lot of Twitter accounts you can go follow and research and all that to get more information. For me personally, I went from one of the main things I noticed, I could barely stand 15 minutes of sunlight, like direct sunlight. Like I would start to get just feel burnt, right? I needed to get out of the sun. I've been living in Hawaii the past 14 months. When I got real serious on this, really just eating beef, salt, fruit, raw milk, and we cook everything at home, like there's no seed oils, don't eat out, don't mess around at all. I started being able to go into the sun for just hours and hours and hours, and I wouldn't really get burnt. I mean, I'd go surf like all day.
With sun cream on or no sun cream?
No sun cream.
Really?
Yeah. And then I've always had sort of dry skin, like on my arms and face, so I've always had to put moisturizer on. Stop needing to do that. I've had different kinds of inflammation, like in my joints, around my nose, things like this. All that started to go away. Gut inflammation, not feeling well, like all that went away. So it's been quite transformative for me, and it really is that simple. Like I tried a lot of interventions before I got into this diet thing, but just eating the foods that we've been eating for millions of years turns out to be pretty good for you.
Yeah, we've been eating meat as well.
Right. We're adapted to it. So the diet, so the diet I was having was a frozen berry raw milk smoothie in the morning. And then I was
When you say raw milk, what do you mean?
Raw milk.
Like cow's milk?
Straight from the cow.
Oh, straight from the cow.
Yeah, we had a provider in Kauai, which I don't even think it's legal to drink raw milk. So we had a provider in Hawaii. We go and pick it up once a week. It's delicious.
But how's the cow fed and raised?
They are just organic.
Yeah.
I don't know if they eat grass or grain, but they're just free range cows in Hawaii. So, so make the smoothie, and then lunch, dinner was basically just beef and salt. I would also mix in some sauerkraut and other fermented foods occasionally. All that did well for me, but it's good. It improved a lot of things that were going wrong in my 30s. So I highly recommend studying about seed oils, studying about the carnivore diet. And it's not just carnivore, because carnivore is like just beef and salt.
Right.
Like, again, having fruit and whatnot added to this. They call it the abundance diet. There's a great, actually, a friend of mine, Paul. He's at Carnivore MD on Instagram.
Okay.
He's a doctor. He talks about all this. There's like a spectrum, right? Where meat and organs were the most desired foods, then fruit, then vegetables, then grains, legumes, all of this. So there's a whole spectrum. And if you just focus on eating the healthy end of the spectrum, you tend to do better. And it's not one size fits all. We're all adapted to different things. We have different ancestral pathways. So you have to do some experimentation and figure out what works for you. But it changes everything in life once you get a hold of it.
Yeah, it's interesting because there is this push in society again, in the media. There's more propaganda when it comes to your diet. And you mentioned eating bugs instead of meat.
Right.
And there's that film, I think it's called Snow Sniper. What's it?
Snowpiercer. Yeah.
Okay. Let's delve into this. So why is there propaganda right now steering people away from meat? And I think I even saw maybe an article on Bloomberg or one of them, which was saying, you know, bugs are actually better for you than meat.
The one that really scared me is I saw a quote from Klaus Schwab, if I'm saying his name correctly.
Do you know what? Who cares if you're not saying it correctly?
The real life Dr. Evil.
Yeah.
And
real life James Bond villain.
Yeah. Basically saying that we need to abolish, this is the head of the World Economic Forum, as I understand it. We need to abolish private property and stop eating meat. Like, this is one little quote of his. I'm not saying it exactly, but paraphrasing. The fact that someone that's the head of the World Economic Forum can blatantly say we need to abolish private property when an economy is not possible. You cannot have an economy without property. Property is your relation to the fruit of your labor that you then trade with others to produce the economy. When you have the head of the World Economic Forum saying we need no more property, that's not what he's saying. He's saying property for me, not for thee, right? Question that. Question that. Property is the basis of civilization. If there's an individual telling you we need to abolish private property, it's equivalent to saying we need to abolish civilization. Read Ayn Rand. Read Mises. Like, this is very cut and dry. And then, so that's scary and disgusting enough. But then they're saying, okay, and we also need to stop eating meat. Meat is the most desirous food. I mean, we've literally been eating it for millions of years. Who is this guy that's been around for 80-something years to come on the scene, or his organization, whatever, and tell us what we should eat? I mean, it's one of the most scary specters of freedom violation I can imagine, to try and dictate by fiat what you eat. It's insane.
So I just really want to understand the fiat place here. It's because it's the legislation.
You eat whatever you want. Who can tell you what to eat?
I agree with you, but it's the fiat, right? Because you say dictate by fiat.
Yes. Well, I guess maybe I'm double emphasizing it in that case. But to dictate what someone eats, to eat this, eat what I tell you, or I will hurt you. That's what fiat means. Do this, whatever it is, eat this thing because I said so, or I will hurt you. They don't need to say all that, right? There can just be a veiled threat of force behind it, right? Just like there are laws, you know, do this, or else you break the law, you suffer the consequences. When that starts to be applied to your dietary choice, I mean, you are what you eat, right? This is a very concerning attack on freedom. And I think you've just got to stand up for it and do not comply, frankly. Like, over my dead body, will you ever tell me what to eat? I will eat whatever I want.
How far would you go?
All the way. All the way.
I'd like to get your, just on that then, I'd like to get your opinion on Djokovic. The tennis player, he didn't go to Australia to play the big game because he hadn't had the medicine.
Right.
And I was really impressed by that, actually, because a lot of people, especially, you know, on Twitter, and you have all these big alpha accounts and whatever, and sort of talk about freedom and all this stuff. But when it came down to it, he was willing to sacrifice his career.
Good for him.
Right.
Yeah.
So how far would you go? Literally over your dead body?
Freedom maximalism. Like, I will stand for it to my death. And I hope that if that comes to pass, that I am at least a shining example for others.
I think it's important. That's what we need more of in society. I think that's actually the problem. A lot of people don't have the courage, don't have the bravery, don't have the strength. I think that's sort of why we see, I believe, the emasculation of men from the media and things like that. So in your opinion, honestly, do you see that there's an agenda being pushed here?
Well, certainly when you're talking about the abolition of private property, I mean, I don't know how you could call that anything but an agenda, because we have private property to some extent in the world. Again, thank God for Bitcoin, the ultimate form of private property. If you want to abolish that, then that is by definition an agenda, right? It's changing a thing that exists. So I don't know, again, back to the government conversation, like how coordinated and intelligent is this versus just people that have just lost their mind, right? If you spend too much time in the ivory tower, you just lose touch with the real world. So maybe they think they're just the Bill Gates or whoever at that level. We don't need these things anymore. I have this new solution. But this is very important too. In Paradise Lost, Milton has this line. He says, "Evil is the knowledge which believes itself complete." So when someone has a model of the world, a mental model of the world that they think is the final answer, right? And they're trying to impose that onto others, that is evil, right? What is good is what people discover, what people naturally move towards through a free market discovery process, right? I have wants, I have felt uneasiness, as Mises says. I go into the world, I engage in voluntary exchange with others to try and solve that. Usually solving a problem I have is also a problem other people have, so I can be an entrepreneur and sell that solution into the marketplace. Others are doing the same. We all cooperate. We increase wealth. We increase human satisfaction. We create civilization. If instead I try to take that mental model and impose it on people, I'm engaging in evil. So the pernicious thing about evil too is that I tend to believe that someone like that may actually think they're doing good, right? He may actually think he's saving the world in his heart of hearts. I don't know, but I could just speculate to think that maybe Klaus Schwab was like, no, we have to do this to save the world. We're going to destroy the world if we don't do this. He may actually think he is a good man doing the right thing and he's being righteous in his action. But that's dangerous, right? That's deceptive. He's being misled by his own idea of imposing a mental model on others rather than letting people discover what's best for them.
So it's all to do with that relationship between the people, the government, and private property. And the way Bitcoin comes into it is because obviously it's decentralized, right? You truly own that. So if we look at a Bitcoin standard and a world where, Bitcoin's been adopted, does that include, let's say, the deed to your house being on the Bitcoin network as an NFT or something like that?
I don't know how, there's a lot of experiments being done where you can execute property transactions and higher layer protocols on the Bitcoin network that would be independent of state authorization. But when it comes to, again, property being the relationship between people and their stuff, so physical people in relation with their physical stuff in the physical world, you're going to need physical security to satisfy that. I think it's going to be a much smaller business overall, basically. Like, it's a business that's blown itself up on fiat. When I say, expanded itself excessively on fiat. But when property can be secured more cheaply, and when there's less incentive to violence, like we talked about earlier, the need for physical security should be reduced as well. So the physical security business model should shrink as well.
Do you truly think that we're going to get onto a Bitcoin standard?
I don't know how you stop it. Bitcoin is like this vortex of positive incentives. So I think when you see the game theoretic aspects of it, that everyone's cooperating, competing in the marketplace to try and secure economic value for themselves. We all have an incentive to hold that in a medium that is most resistant to the opinions of others. Right? I want to hold my money, my economic life force, or monetary energy, as Saylor might say. I want to hold that in something that no one else's opinions or behaviors or actions can affect. Right? The most untouchable asset is the most desirous asset.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what Bitcoin is. Can't inflate it, can't confiscate it, can't interrupt the network, can't turn it off, can't reverse it, can't stop it. So how does that not become, how is Bitcoin, I can't imagine Bitcoin not having an incredible amount of demand in a world where we're freezing the bank accounts of peaceful protesters, where we're freezing the foreign reserves of Russia when they go to war. Like, this pain that people and institutions are going to feel through the security vulnerability of fiat, that it can be shut off, canceled, seized, etc., that's going to push them into and towards this untouchable asset. That's my opinion.
Do you think that the increasing authoritarianism that we're seeing, you mentioned Canada, you mentioned freezing, seizing accounts of Russians and so on, do you think that in a perverse way that's kind of going to be good for Bitcoin in terms of waking people up?
Pain is information. Literally. That's how organisms adapt, right? They're dealing with some situation in their environment that they're not. If it's a giraffe trying to eat the tree and its neck's not long enough, it's feeling the pain of not getting the food that it wants, and then over many generations its neck gets longer. Or the turtle gets attacked and there's some maybe gap in its shell that one of its predators is exploiting, and then over time the turtle's shell adapts. Like, we are informed by pain, and you know this in your own life, right? If you just win and succeed over and over and over, that can lead you astray. Actually, it's those times where you screw up and you learn a lesson the hard way. That's what reforms you, changes your character. That's what working out is, right? You go into the gym and you consciously apply physical adversity to your body to force it to adapt. And working out hurts, right? You can't put yourself in formation without pain. So all of the educational effort that we do, I think it's very important, and I'd love to be a part of it. But sort of paradoxically, government action is the greatest billboard for Bitcoin in the world, and we will never be able to speak louder than that. And so, yes, in my opinion, it's a bit unfortunate, but it is fundamental to reality that people and organisms learn through pain.
I totally agree with you. A lot of people talk about NFTs and all this stuff being the road to adoption, but I think it's just fun, I think it's the pain where the innovation comes from. So what would you say right now, where are we at right now? Because there's obviously a lot of hostility from governments, particularly in the US. I think it was Elizabeth Warren that just refused to be taught about Bitcoin and, its connection to illicit activity or being able to enable illicit activity. So where are we at with Bitcoin adoption right now?
I had a guest on past few days, Mr. Larry Lepard, and he said we are at 25% of the U.S. population holding Bitcoin. I didn't know it was that high.
That's high.
I thought we were sub 10%. I don't know. And I don't know that you can even trust the data necessarily. I'm not sure how it's derived. I don't spend a lot of time trying to figure it out either. So maybe there's a way to figure it out accurately. I'm not sure. I'm just looking at the incentives ultimately, like what's happening in the world and what are people's incentives in the long run. And so it's really hard to predict the future, but I think if you look at economics, you can at least establish a probabilistic trajectory for things, right? Like, you could have, if you understood the internet, you probably could have figured out that traditional media was fucked 20 years ago, right? You just understand the economic model is superior, right? That it's cheaper distribution, zero cost of bandwidth, improves margins for creators, things like this. So if you just look at the economic circumstances within a given technological paradigm, I think it gives you some indication of the direction the world's going. And so very simply with Bitcoin, in a world where everyone's printing money, everyone, like every central bank, is violating the private property rights of their citizenry at an unprecedented rate, the money that no one can print, right, the property that no one can violate, becomes increasingly desired in that world. And you can't reverse this fiat debt spiral. Like you need to print more and more money to keep the system sustainable. So inflation is not linear, right? It's exponential. We went from a $700 billion bailout in 2008 to 20 trillion in 2020. The next one's probably going to be in the hundreds of trillions. And before you know it, bread and milk are going to be thousands of dollars, and the dollars are not going to make sense anymore. They're not going to be relevant. They're not going to hold their value. You won't even be able to think in it. You know, in Weimar, Germany, things got so bad that people would order all their beers at the beginning of the night because they would increase the price of beer 3 or 4 times throughout the night, one night at the bar. So you'd go to the bar and you'd order your 10 beers or whatever at the beginning of the night. And that was that.
Where was this and when?
This is Weimar, Germany in the 20s, I believe.
Wow.
Hyperinflation's really, really, really bad. Just spend the next 24 hours, count how many times you use money or think in money or negotiate in money. Now imagine that money has lost all meaning and you can't, how do you do anything? How do you do anything?
How long do you think the US dollar has left?
I have a public prediction that the US dollar is hyperinflated into worthlessness by 2035. I could be wrong. I just looked at historical hyperinflations, the timing of them, in terms of percentage of supply increase, where again, it gets orders of magnitude worse each time. There tends to be a breaking point. Hyperinflation, I think, is 50% month over month inflation. Price inflation is the technical definition for hyperinflation. And I think we get there by 2035, just based on some proxies from history.
You made a tweet recently, which was pretty controversial. But after this conversation, it's sort of starting to make a little bit more sense. Rape is to sex as fiat is to Bitcoin, something like that?
Yeah.
Let's go into that. What did you mean? What did you mean by that tweet?
Yeah, I was accused of trivializing rape. I was also accused of making a category error and that I should never compare these two things. But the end of the tweet was mutual consent matters.
Right.
And it does, right? The difference between sex and rape is consent. The difference between a transaction and theft is consent. The difference between a job and slavery is consent. The power to say no is the root of sovereignty. If you don't have the power to say no, if someone's physically coercing you over your attestation to the contrary, like stop, no, I want to leave, no more of this, then that's a non-consensual exchange and you're in the realm of immorality and evil in my estimation. It could have been an insensitive tweet because I know people have been through things that are horrible and terrible, but hyperinflations are pretty horrible and terrible. And the wars that fiat currency funds are pretty horrible and terrible. There were 169 million people murdered in the 20th century by states, fiat-funded states. I'll say that again. And this is from a state university study, University of Hawaii study. They call it democide. It's such a huge tragedy, they gave it its own name. 169 million people murdered in the 20th century by fiat-funded states. I know rape is bad. That's pretty bad too.
Yeah, I understand. I enjoyed the comments. I enjoyed the whole thing. But I understand it's the lack of mutual consent. And naturally, if you talk about fiat and how it funds wars and war equals death, then you have rape and you have death. So
they're both bad.
Both sounds pretty bad.
And I was attacked, and people are like, "Be careful, you're gonna get canceled again." And I'm like, "Cancel me? What is this fiat cancel bullshit? Cancel me? I don't care." I'm sorry the tweet was not sensitive. Unfollow me. Okay. I am actually genuinely sorry to anyone that like took offense to it or didn't feel bad about it. Like, I'm sorry, but I hope if you've listened to this interview that I'm not trivializing anything. I'm very serious. I think this is the number one problem we face as a species is this element of coercion, compulsion, violence. And it's all remedied by putting all of our emphasis on mutual consent in all human relations.
And so you think that a Bitcoin standard is inevitable, is that correct?
I don't believe in the word inevitable. You know, there's no way to know the future, and anyone that lives by the crystal ball is bound to eat glass. But I just think I call it an unstoppable vortex of positive incentives. It's probably one of the best phrases I've found for it. You know, it's incentivizing everyone to contribute to the proliferation and success of its network. That's how it works, basically. It's ingenious. So if we don't destroy ourselves by fiat first, then I think Bitcoin has a very high likelihood of success.
Robert, I want to thank you so much. I really appreciate you breaking down all of those ideas. I've never actually heard somebody speak about war and how Bitcoin truly fixes this. I know it's this catchphrase that we hear in the community a lot. So I really appreciate you taking the time to truly explain how Bitcoin fixes all of these problems.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the conversation. You asked great questions. Thank you so much.
Any final words you'd like to offer of wisdom?
I don't know when this is airing, but we're doing a live event on Friday night in Miami. That's April 8th. It's going to be
might air after. Maybe Friday. I'm not sure.
Well, we're also going to release a recording of that live event. The live event's on April 8th. We have a special guest for the What Is Money show. We're going to record in front of a live studio audience in Miami at the Bitcoin 2022 conference. I will release that episode on YouTube and podcast probably 2 weeks later. So it's like end of April. And I hope and intend for it to be one of those timeless Bitcoin discussions. So I hope you guys will check it out.
Guys, don't forget to follow Robert on all socials. He has a newsletter. He has a YouTube, a Twitter. And am I missing anything else?
No, that's it. Yeah, the Freedom Analyx is the Substack. The What Is Money show is the YouTube and podcast. And Twitter is at Breedlove 2022. Breedlove 22, not 2022. That's really tongue twisted me a lot this year so far.
Yeah, I can imagine. Robert, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Guys, thanks so much for watching. Please don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you never miss another fantastic interview. We'll see you next week. The Layah Heilpern Show.